Now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Morning, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, Phil. How about yourself?
Good. So I've noticed your latest article pretty much reflects what everybody else around the country is thinking, and some people are saying.
Yeah, that's right. So look, basically, I wrote an article early in the week, and it summarised all the recent opinion polls, and there's been about 4 or 5 in the last month or so, which have all shown exactly the same thing, and that's that Australians want significantly lower immigration. So, as we know, since the pandemic, Australia has experienced the biggest migration surge in its history. So, in the first couple of years of the Albanese government, we got about 1.1 million migrants flooding into the nation, and it's still at a very high level. It's at immigration is running at historically high levels. The most recent data for the March quarter, which is the latest we received, the annual rate of migration was still higher than anything Australia had ever experienced before mid-2022. So if you go back through Australia's history before September quarter of 2022, in fact, we never, ever had higher migration than what we recorded in the March quarter. So it's still running very high. It has come down from peak, but it's incredibly high. So just in the past few weeks, we've seen a whole bunch of polls, and they said that Australians reject excessively high migration levels. So we got some polling from Macquarie University's Housing and Urban Research Centre, and that showed that 2/3 of respondents believe that Australia should reduce immigration to address the housing crisis. Resolve Political Monitor, about a week apart, released polling of 1,800 Australians right across the political spectrum. It was held in early October, and it showed that 58% support a, quote, significant reduction in migration levels. And in fact, those supporting immigration cuts versus those wanting higher immigration outnumbered 4-1. So Australians there want immigration cut. The Institute of Public Affairs released a separate survey about a week apart again, and that showed that 60% of Australians believe that migration levels are too high, whereas only 7% thought they were too low. The Institute of Public Affairs also found that 71% of people believe that Australia should temporarily pause immigration, so that's pause it, basically freeze it, until economic and social infrastructure such as housing, schools, hospitals, all that sort of thing catches up. So until supply catches up with demand. And the most recent poll, which we actually got from Newspoll this week, showed that 64% of voters want immigration cut, and of those 64%, 39% want a lot fewer migrants, and that's against only 10% who want more immigration. So all these polls basically confirm what we already know. The federal government's Big Australia immigration policy has never been embraced by Australia's people, by the Australian people before the pandemic. So if we go back the last decade, Phil, before the pandemic, virtually every single opinion poll that had come out said that Australians impose running a high immigration program. So the data is crystal clear. Australians want significantly lower levels of immigration. They do not favour so-called Big Australia. Now, remember, the federal government's own official forecasts say that Australia is going to grow by another 13.5 million people in the next 40 years. Now, just to put that into perspective, this is their own forecasts. 13.5 million people is like adding another Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane to Australia's current population in just 40 years. So we don't have enough houses already. We've got a rental crisis that's the worst in living memory. We've got infrastructure bottlenecks everywhere. The natural environment's under strain. We obviously have energy issues. We've got potential future issues with water supplies. Well, what do you think is going to happen when we add another Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane to Australia's population in just 40 years? Obviously, all those issues are going to get worse. We're going to get more crush-related infrastructure, and housing will become smaller and less affordable. And what I'd personally like to see is I'd like to see Australia's net overseas migration not reduced to zero. I think that'd be stupid, but it should be reduced back to what it was in the early 2000s. So between 2000, so around about the time of the Sydney Olympics, and 2004, before the federal government ramped it up, our net overseas migration averaged 120,000 per year. Right? And it was so currently, the most recent data, we've had 316,000. Obviously, 316,000 is significantly higher than 120,000. We should try and get back to those sorts of levels, and we should focus on higher skilled migrants rather than this sort of blanket approach of just pulling in everybody. And we should be focusing on quality over quantity. So if Australia did this and we did reduce immigration, obviously take the pressure off the housing problem we've got, off the infrastructure problem we've got, it would alleviate stress on the energy system, on the water system, the natural environment. It would make it easier for Australia to meet its carbon emission targets, because if we grow the population by 50% over the next 40 years, which is the official projection, 13.5 million people, it's going to be a lot harder to cut our greenhouse gas emissions, isn't it? If you're going to add another 50% of people using resources, consuming, using energy, well, obviously that means your emissions are going to go up. So it makes that harder as well. And what I'd also like to say, Phil, is I'd like to see a plebiscite held at the next general election, so the next federal election, which basically asks Australians how big they want Australia to become. We should ask the Australian people, direct democracy, at the next federal election, we should give them a range of population sizes, and we should take the median, the middle selection by Australians at the next federal election about how big they want Australia to become. So if they say 30 million people, that's the target that the federal government should aim for. They should set migration at a level to meet the population size that is desired by the Australian people. Now, will the Albanese government do this? Absolutely not. Because despite the fact that virtually every single opinion poll says that Australians want less immigration, and that's been the case for 10 to 15 years, the Albanese government is going to continue to run an excessive immigration policy. And there's a reason for that. First of all, Australia's two largest source nations for migrants, which is now India and China, they overwhelmingly vote for Labor over the coalition. So Pollster Kos Samaras, he did some analysis on the most recent federal election. For example, he estimated that 85% of Indian Australians vote Labor. And the previous election, so the 2022 election, research done by the Carnegie Endowment on that election found that about 2/3 of Indians voted for Labor over the coalition. So obviously, when you have the largest migrant source, which is India, voting for Labor, well, Labor's got a direct incentive to keep running high immigration from India because it bolsters their supporter base. Also, Labor likes high immigration because if you run a high immigration policy, you also split the coalition's base. Now, we're seeing this at the moment. We're running a very high immigration policy, and the coalition is now being splintered into one nation. So it's driving voters towards one nation, which means that the coalition's actually losing voter support because its space is getting split into getting diluted into one nation, which then makes it easier for Labor to retain government. So Labor's not going to do this. Now, late last month, a few weeks back, the former Deputy Secretary of the Immigration Department, his name's Abul Rizvi, he wrote a piece and he forecast that Australia's net overseas migration under current immigration settings is going to track at an average of 300,000 annually. Now, to put that into perspective, only once in Australia's history, before the pandemic, have we ever hit 300,000. That was under Big Australia Kevin Rudd in 2008-2009, where we hit 315,000. So we only just exceeded 300,000 once. Abul Rizvi, he forecast that under current immigration settings that Labor's set, that 300,000 is going to be the new normal of Australia's migration. Now, in the 60 years after World War II, we averaged 90,000 net overseas migration a year. After it was ramped up in the mid-2000s, and the 15 years leading up to the pandemic, it went to 220,000. In the last 5 years, we've had 270,000 average net overseas migration. Well, now Rizvi believes it's going to go even higher. It's going to average 300,000 going forward. So if we were to average 300,000, instead of having a 13.5 million population increase, which is Treasury's current forecast, which I mentioned before, it'd probably be something more like 17 million. It'd be even more extreme population growth because 300,000 annual net overseas migration is actually 15% more than Treasury's current forecast. So this is just diabolical because what it means is that Labor is effectively, the policies they're running, they have locked in extreme levels of immigration going forward, and that is not supported by Australian voters. As I mentioned, all the opinion polls show that they want immigration cut. Instead, Labor's actually increasing it. It's increasing the average migration rate versus history. And, of course, what it means is that Australia's renters are going to get trampled. Because at the moment, we've got record low rental vacancy rates. We've got, we've seen a 40+% increase in rents in the last 5 years. The typical renter in Australia is now paying around $10,500 more to rent a home than they were at the start of the pandemic. And obviously, if you're going to import 300,000 people a year going forward, which Emma Roosevelt believes is the new normal, well, that's just going to make the housing shortage worse. We can't build enough homes. It's going to mean that the rental crisis is going to continually get worse, and we're going to have a whole, generation of people who are basically pushed into housing stress because of Labor's ridiculous net overseas immigration policy, which is not supported by the Australian people, as shown in every single opinion poll virtually in the last decade.
Wow, that's some good insights there.
Yeah, it's crazy, mate. So, this is the big area. This is one of the big issues that's facing Australia. It's one of those sleeper issues that everybody listening to this is impacted by one way or another, whether it's you wait longer in your car to get to work because there's too much traffic on the roads and we don't have the infrastructure for it, or if you're crush-loaded in a sardine-packed train, or if you're forced to live in a shoebox apartment because basically we're not building houses anymore because there's not enough room in places like Sydney, and you're paying more to rent a place than you were because there's more people coming in than we have houses for. These are all the sort of bread and butter, nuts and bolts issues that impact people when we run such an extreme immigration program that is so far beyond our ability to build homes, to build infrastructure, to supply all the things you need when you bring in that many people.